everybody, and thanks for coming back to see us here. I'm Dirk Wood, CEO of Parallaxis, and with us today we have Dan Chernoff. Dan's somebody who I've worked with in the past. A lot of folks here at Parallaxis have. He's what we would call an expert in many, many things technical, and just wanted to get his thoughts on AI. AI is obviously kind of, the buzzword of the day, but there's a lot of stuff around it that we'd like to talk to. So Dan, welcome. Thanks for being here. Appreciate your time. And with that, we'll probably just go ahead and jump right in. So Dan, you know, as you know, I mean, AI really is working its way into our everyday lives. Many times super transparently, and we don't even always know it's there. Everybody's always talking about the positives, but maybe would you mind kind of addressing how could this negatively affect us?
So AI in many cases is used to automate large quantities of transactions for a huge user base. So think of things like your Netflix recommendations, or when you go shop at Target or eBay, or all of those recommender systems. And in most cases, it doesn't really negatively affect you. But a thing to remember about AI models is that they really focus on two things. One, an assumption that birds of a feather flock together, meaning that as a person, if you have specific attributes, you're likely to like specific things, which is why recommender systems work so well. And that when you're building models or when you're looking at how AI is used, those things that they're measuring are almost never the things they're actually trying to predict. They're using proxies to predict. For example, a student's success at an Ivy League school. We use proxies of grade point averages, how much they volunteer, their attendance as a proxy for how well they'll do at an Ivy League. We're not able to actually measure that, but that proxy is what we're trying to use to approximate it. And those are never accurate.
One thing we talked about in the past was kind of vulnerable groups. Can you maybe talk a few minutes on why is the use of AI so impactful on or to vulnerable groups?
Sure. So I'm going to steal from some really smart people. One of them is Kathy O'Neill. She wrote a book called Weapons of Math Destruction. It's a fantastic book that really talks about AI and its use in the modern day. And she frames these WMDs, or weapons of math destruction, in with three attributes. The first is that it has a large impact, or it impacts many people. Second, that the models used lack transparency. And finally, that they reinforce some kind of bias. So let's dig into what that means a bit. When we talk about lacking large impact, that's pretty straightforward, that it's really affecting the majority of people. And in many cases, those are the most vulnerable, right? They are the large consumer base that most companies are going after. Second is lacking transparency. And that comes really in two forms. One, you don't really understand why the model is making its decisions because it's not explaining it to you. And two, you don't know what data the model was trained on or what it's using as measurements, which means that you don't have the ability to understand why you were not selected for a loan or not selected to get into a school. And finally, the reinforcement of bias. In many cases, you'll see that AI is being used as an arbiter, and it's assumed that because it's technical and it uses very complicated math, that it will be right. And that incorrect prediction or that incorrect evaluation is fed back to the model or fed back to the data that the model uses for training and reinforces that incorrect statement. And you have lots of examples of this. If you look at the value added models, not necessarily AI, but the value added models that were used for teacher evaluations, which didn't take into account, which only took into account student performance, not any of the other things that go into student success.
Hmm. That's super interesting, especially for me. As that the bias piece is interesting, but also kind of worrisome if it's reinforcing a bias that it's built with. So that's a good segue to the next question is, with all those concerns, I mean, as a data leaders and people maybe watching this, I mean, what should they be doing or what should they be thinking about?
So the first thing we need to do as data leaders is have a clear understanding what the objectives are for our models. The clearer we understand what it is that we're trying to do, that first step in your AI journey is always define the question. The better that we can define the question, the better that we can understand the things that we're trying to change, the things that we're trying to evaluate. That will let us be be specific about the metrics that we're going to use to measure the model, as well as those things that we're using or those features, those proxies that we're going to use to train the model. And the more specific we can be, the better that our models will be. The second thing we should be able to do is provide explanations for the recommendations or the evaluations that come from the model. This is very difficult in many cases. Modern models are black boxes. So when you hear the buzzwords of neural networks and LLMs, what's going on inside the model is not easy to understand. It is very much a black box. But there are techniques we can use as data leaders, like Shapley Values and LIME, to be able to provide insight into why we think the model did what it did.
One follow-up question is, you said black box and being transparent, opening this up, and how are the models trained, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that most people do that, or do you think that they would think that that is them kind of giving away their secret sauce?
It's a complicated question and it's a complicated answer. At the end of the day, I'm always going to fall back on what statistician George Box said. All models are wrong. Some are useful. Our models will always be wrong. And when used in an autonomous way, when there's no human in the loop, it affects the vulnerable groups the most. So we really should be thinking about how our models are going to be used, the groups that are going to be affected, and always ensure that the damage is minimized as much as possible. And in all cases, no matter what the model is, we should aim to use them as an augmentation for human decisions and always provide a mechanism for people to challenge the decisions. And that benefits us in two ways. First, if it's being challenged, we'll know that the model was wrong and we can feed that back into the model to help it be more accurate. And second, it allows us to capture additional features or proxies that we may not have thought of before, so that as we evolve our model, it can become more accurate. So providing that feedback loop and providing that feedback mechanism is helpful to us as well as to the people that we're using the model for.
Awesome, cool. That gives me a lot to think about too. The other one too is, why has none of these AI companies named themselves Skynet yet? That I don't understand how that has not happened yet. I don't get
Wow. Negative connotation, probably.
it.